Good evening, welcome to another Focus on Friday, and tonight we're going to discuss Mabel Hampton. Mabel was an American lesbian activist, a dancer during the Harlem Renaissance, and a volunteer across her life for many, many things, including Black causes, gay and lesbian organizations, and she was a significant contributor to the Lesbian Her Story archives, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Mabel was born in 1902 in North Carolina, in Winston-Salem, in fact. Unfortunately, her mother died a couple months after she was born from poisoning. She would go on to live with her grandmother for 7 years until her grandmother died of a stroke, and then she would move to New York City to live with her aunt and her uncle. Unfortunately, that lasted about a year because her uncle sexually molested her, and she ran away to live with a white family in New Jersey and lived with them up until she was 17. A couple of years after that, she was arrested in New York City at a women's only party. The arrest was for being a sex worker, although she was never a sex worker. That was simply a coding that the cops of the time would use to break up large gatherings of lesbians, because it wasn't technically illegal to be a lesbian at the time, but it was definitely illegal to be a sex worker, and it was considered immoral to be a lesbian. So they went around the law and would do that. She would spend 13 months in a correctional facility of 3 years worth of imprisonment for the sex work, but she was paroled early under the auspice that she never returned to New York City. She agreed and promptly ignored it. In the 1920s, she would end up dancing for Black productions alongside the Harlem Renaissance stars such as Gladys Bentley, and then she would perform at the club The Garden of Joy and sang in the Lafayette Theater chorus, where she would enjoy herself immensely. But as both of those activities declined with the progression of the movie industry, she would end up needing to find income working as a house cleaner for wealthy white families, which she would do as her main source of income for the rest of her life. In 1932, she would meet Lillian Foster. Lillian Foster was an activist and fellow lesbian, and the two of them actually would be partners and would live for the rest of Lillian Foster's life together, which was a solid 46 years. Unfortunately, she died in 1978. But while they were together, they were huge activists participating in the New York Defense Recreation Committee, which during World War II would gather cigarettes and bubble gum and things that soldiers in World War II would get in care packages. She was a big-time supporter of the military in that respect. And then she would go on to join the Lesbian Her Story archives as one of the founders and major contributors in the oral histories and the artifacts, collecting artifacts, items significant to the gay and lesbian movement in New York City. And that became one of the largest compilation of artifacts to this day of that time frame. She would even go on to volunteer her time with SAGE, which is an organization that supplies resources to older gays and lesbians who have minimal income and no other way of supporting themselves. And she would even contribute to the Martin Luther King Memorial Fund, despite the fact that she had effectively a lower quality blue-collar salary. But her salary was literally the only thing low quality about this woman. She was just an amazing woman, and she would then go on to spend the rest of her volunteering times with other gay and lesbian activities throughout the year. She was the Grand Marshal in New York City of the Gay Pride Parade in 1985, and her death was featured on the front pages of the Lesbian Her Story Archives newsletter in 1990. When she died, unfortunately, of pneumonia in 1989. And she was just memorable equally for being a lesbian, activist and historian and archivist, for being a black performer during the height of the Renaissance in the 20s and through the 40s, and she was just an all-around amazing woman. So that, someone that you didn't know was part of our culture and our history. You'll have a good night.